Bonjour à toutes, bonjour à tous. Merci d'écouter France-Soir. Les recours pour empêcher l'extradition vers l'Amérique du journaliste et lanceur d'alerte Julian Assange sont bientôt tous écoulés. Nous sommes aujourd'hui avec son demi-frère, demi-frère du fondateur de Wikileaks, qui est aussi le producteur du film documentaire Ithaka, Le combat pour libérer Assange, dans lequel on suit la famille recomposée de Julian Assange, avec le combat notamment de son père et de sa femme, Stella, pour le faire libérer d'Angleterre, où il est toujours enfermé depuis 2019. Welcome, Gabriel, and thank you for being on our media. So, how did you become producer of the movie?
Well, that's my background. I'm a film producer. Usually produce drama films, scripted films. Films with a script, with actors, with props and sets. But it was in 2019 when I went to see Julian inside the prison. I went with journalist John Pilger and my father John Shipton, and it was during that visit that we found Julian. He was very, very. I'd never found him like that before. He was very distressed. He was, very emotional, very distressed, and it was a time when he was being kept in the health wing of the prison, which the prisoners referred to as the hell wing. Total isolation. Uh, and I left the prison that day feeling like I might never see Julian again. And it was that time that I started to think, how can I contribute? How can I use my skills as a film producer to contribute to the campaign to free Julian? And at that time, we as Julian's family, we understand his story and we understand what he's going through from a very close perspective. And I wanted to tell that story. I wanted to tell a story about Julian through the people who love him most and their struggle to free him, and hopefully, connect with audiences in a different way, in an emotional way, because we often say in filmmaking, you open the heart and then you open the mind, and that's what I wanted to do and what we set out to do by making this film.
As a reminder, so Julian Assange revealed in 2010 millions of documents like military crimes of the US government in Afghanistan or scandal of corruption or in the finance. He is threatened to be extradited to the USA, where he could finish his life because he is accused of spying on governments, even though he did a journalistic work. Uh, just with this argument, what do you think when you heard that he is accused of spying on government? What does it mean, and what do you want to say to the people today?
Yeah, I mean, it's when if I think bringing information to people about what governments are doing in their name, you know, it's journalism. It's that core pillar of democracy. Without it, democracy doesn't work. If we don't know, if we can't understand, what our governments are doing with our power that we delegate to them when we vote, with our money that they take from us in taxes, if we can't understand what they're doing, through journalism, through publishing, then do we really live in a democracy? And so I think when we start classifying journalists and publishers, as spies, then democracy becomes a bit of a joke, really. It's a technique that's often used in totalitarian regimes. Some places have special prisons for journalists where they send them all and lock them up. But to me, that's what it says. It's a huge red flag that once journalists start being called spies, once publishers start being called spies, it means that democracy is on the way out.
It's a censorship. It's a way to attack people who wants to do a journalistic work.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And they call them spies, and then they say, well, sometimes they even say, you're not a journalist. which we all know is just a complete joke. Anybody could be a journalist. So, this sort of defining of, what is true, what is not, and the sort of veracity or the sort of, where information comes from. It's more and more common these days. People say, well, this information, it's come from a hack, and so that makes it less true, which is, it's a total joke. Everybody knows that, hacked information is some of the best information that comes to us. So this sort of defining information and the provenance of information is often used to detract from what is actually inside the information, the corruption the information exposes. And Niels Melzer, I think, in the film, Niels Melzer says this really well. Julian, he shone the spotlight. He shone the spotlight on them, on these corrupt institutions, corrupt individuals, murderers, torturers. And so what they did is they turned the spotlight around and shone it on him and said, "You're a spy. You are the corrupt one." When really all he did was expose their crimes.
And so you told us before that you saw Julian in his prison, where he is since 2019 in England. You saw him suffering. Was it important to you with this movie to show his family, to remember that when governments are doing that to people, they are doing that to humans?
Yeah, certainly. That was something that we intentionally set out to do, is to sort of show the audience, how Julian is a father, how he raises his children from inside prison, how he communicates with his wife Stella, from inside the jail, to give us sort of understanding of what daily life is like for Julian, and also sort of unwind the years of demonization that Julian has suffered. He's been taken away from view. He hasn't been able to attend his court hearings. He hasn't been able to appear at court since January 6, 2021. And so he's really been taken away, put in this prison cell, dehumanized. One of the techniques of this torture that he's going through is the dehumanization. So this technique is, you take a person, you make them less human. We see it more and more now. You call them an animal, or you call them a spy, or you call them a rapist, and you're attempting to dehumanize this person to make what you're doing to them seem okay to the broader population. And we tried to unwind a lot of that with this film, so that people who watch it get to know Julian in a different way. Hopefully they can see a little bit of Julian's sense of humor in the film as well, because he has a very dark sense of humor as well.
And I talk in my introduction that time is running out to get free Julian Assange with the legal recourses that are still possible. Before speaking about that, the movie Ithaka just came out in last October in France, but we heard that it had a big impact in Australia. What can you tell us? Because with that human aspect of the movie, people were really touched by that and asked the politic to do something. And it was just before the federal election in 2022, I guess.
Yeah, so the Ithaka, the film, has been a real game changer in Australia. It came out. It was broadcast on television, broadcast by the public broadcaster, the ABC, and it really just changed the way people were thinking about this case, or changed the way people thought about Julian, and gave them a personal connection. They began to understand what's going on. This is a human. None of this makes sense. Once you sort of dig down or even just scrape the surface a little bit, and being able to show people at a broad, a broad audience in Australia, to be able to show them that really changed the game. And now you have the Prime Minister of Australia who's advocating for Julian. You have over a third of the Australian Parliament who have signed on to the most recent letter was over a third of the Australian Parliament. You even had a delegation of Australian parliamentarians, one from every party, totally bipartisan or non-partisan, one from the left, one from the right, one from the real left, one from the far right, all flew to Washington to advocate for Julian Assange's release. And that is all credit not just to the film, but also the relentless campaign that has been going on in Australia. But the film definitely helped in really connecting with people and people who normally wouldn't think about issues such as press freedom or freedom of speech, to be able to connect that human side, that basic human rights that a person is entitled to connect that with Julian's case, I think was very important.
And that's a really interesting thing, is because in France there is really this division when the leftists are taking a subject, people from the right doesn't really move on the subject. So today it's really a leftist subject in France to want to get free Julian Assange. But in France, it's still in politics a really small thing. So it's interesting that in Australia it came out big, but why does it took 14 years, almost 15 years because Julian is threatened since 2010. So he's Australian. Why with your analysis, why does it took 14 years in Australia?
Well, I think this, as you say, it's gone on. This has gone on for very many years, and back in 2016, it looked like Julian was going to get out of the Ecuadorian embassy. He ended up spending 7 years there, but in 2016, the UN Working Group on Arbitrary Detention wrote a report that found Julian was being arbitrarily detained. The Swedish investigation was sort of coming to an end. But then I think we had Julian released, the Vault 7, the cables, the Vault 7 leaks, rather. And those leaks were incredibly damaging to the intelligence community in the United States. It showed, that they were spying on world leaders' telephones. They were able to hack into the phones of world leaders. They were able to hack into people's televisions in their house. And not only that, but that they'd lost control of those tools. So this was majorly embarrassing for Julian. And that's when we really saw this campaign ramp up against Julian. It was in 2017 that Mike Pompeo, who was then head of the CIA, came out and in his first speech, made very clear that he was going after Julian. He was going after Wikileaks. And it was around that time that inside the Ecuadorian embassy, there was new cameras installed, listening devices installed, and it's now become public that inside the Ecuadorian embassy, Julian was being spied on, and the Spanish security company that was meant to be protecting him in the embassy actually became a CIA cutout. And they were spying on his meetings with his lawyers, with his doctors, and sending that information back to the United States every 15 days. And that's become clear in a Spanish court case, but also in a very lengthy article that cites 30 former and current intelligence community people in Washington. It was a Yahoo News article that came out in September 21. And so that's been, confirmed. Pompeo Mike Pompeo, then head of CIA and later head of the State Department, said that all the sources for that article should be prosecuted. So he inadvertently confirmed that it was his organization that was spying on Julian. There were even plots to kidnap Julian, plots to murder Julian. And so this sort of ramping up of the pursuit of Julian changed the public opinion a lot, I believe. As these things came out, as this total corruption came out, people started to really see what lengths that these people would go to get Julian. And then when this indictment dropped in 2019, it was all there for everyone to read. People could read for themselves that that the United States Department of Justice was charging Julian Assange with espionage for publishing information in the public interest. And I think the public opinion really started to shift then. Once this was all there, clear in writing from the Department of Justice, this spying, these plots to kidnap Julian, plots to murder Julian, were all public. These have all worked in Julian's favor, in a sense, to change the public opinion in his favor. It's as time passes, the facts of this case, they rise to the top, and the lies, they sink further and further down. And so we just hope Julian can hang on long enough for the public opinion to really be able to set him free.
As a reminder, Julian Assange could, if he is extradited to the US, he could have a condemnation of more than 100 years. It's a real threat. We said before, time is running out to get Julian Assange free. What can you tell us about that? Because the recourses are, the legal recourses are almost all done.
That's right. He's got a hearing coming up in London on the 20th and 21st of February, and if he loses at that hearing, that's it for him in the courts of the United Kingdom. There is no further legal recourse there. He does have he will submit under Article 39 of the European Court of Human Rights to stop the extradition if the courts rule against him. And then there will be, if that goes ahead, then there'll be a proceeding in the European courts. But really, time's running out for Julian in a sense that, the British, there's not many, after this hearing, if he loses, there's no more options in the British courts. And we know that in the past, they've had planes waiting on the tarmac for Julian to whisk him away as quickly as possible, that they've made plans to really move on this extradition and get him out of the United Kingdom as quickly as they can if he loses in February. I mean, you got to think he's been in the United Kingdom for the last 14 years. I would imagine, they've had a gutful of having, this press freedom, this massive worldwide attention, attention-gaining press freedom case in London. I imagine they want to get rid of it pretty quickly.
And you talked before about the positive public opinion. But today, we had Ben Lawrence, the movie director of the documentary on this channel. He told us about the small action that people could have. Because I told him, in France, for example, there is many people like ours. In France, Julian Assange is a really positive figure. People are positive for him, but they do not move. They do not go to protestation, or they do not sit in front of an embassy. I don't say what people have to do, but I ask myself, and I ask this question to you. You saw a lot of people who want to protest to get free Julian Assange. What do you think people can do as a little or big action to help your brother?
Well, I think if you look at what's happened in other areas of Europe and particularly in Italy, they've taken it really to a sort of um, very local level, like a local government level, where Julian has been now named a citizen in must be like 20 towns in Italy, right? And so all these little towns, even though, they have a small council, a small local government, they've taken upon themselves to give Julian citizenship, of their town. And then it builds up, then it's Napoli, and then it's Roma, next it's Milan. So, and Torino. So, this is one interesting phenomena that we've seen, is that engaging with government at the local level, the council level, has had an impact in that people have more connection to government and council, and that they can have more influence there. So I think that's one interesting thing that we've seen happening. But we always encourage people to take their concern. You be part of the democratic process. Take your concern to your representatives. Support representatives, who are supporting Julian publicly, and things like that. Sign petitions. Donate if you can afford to. Go to rallies. I mean, all these little things. They all build and build and build and build and build, and then they become huge. Which is what we've seen in Julian's case with this. A worldwide movement that, even the Pope, the Pope saw Julian's wife at the end of last year. And so I think, the little things that we can do, whether it's talking to our neighbors, talking to our family with good information, or, naming Julian a citizen of your town, they all help in the fight to free him.
Yeah, so it's a lot of little action. It's interesting because you can write to your politician in France. You can write to them to make them able to take their responsibility to support subjects. So yeah, it can be a good action in France. Before we conclude this interview, in the family aspect. So maybe you. How was it when you saw Julian before Wikileaks, before John is his biological father, but he did not, Julian did not grow up with John. So what is how was your story with Julian,
With
and
Julian,
how was he before Wikileaks?
yeah, I mean, I've got many fond memories of getting. I really got to know Julian when I was, he's 11 years older than me. So I really got to know him when I was in my teens, in my late teens. He would come and stay with us. He'd even stayed with me. I used to live in a share house with, 5 friends, and Julian would come up and he'd stay, and he'd be up working on the computer all night, and doing all sorts of stuff like that, even back then. So, many fond
So you were
memories.
close. You were close.
Yeah, we became close. Yeah, we became close through the years. And had many fond memories of Julian, and what we got up to around the place. And a lot of him was visiting us, or visiting me up in Sydney and staying with us, and getting to know him during that time. It was a simpler time. And then yeah, it was good. I look back very fondly. I have many fond memories of around those times of riding bikes around the place, and um, you know different things like that. But Julian was I always admired him. As somebody who was you know very intelligent, but also very caring and loving. Um, he was always uh, he was never shy about giving you his time. He would always give you his time. And many of his friends say this as well. I think it continued on even when he was working with WikiLeaks, that he was always very generous with his time. He loved to talk and, stay up all night chatting and, talking about any sort of subject under the sun. And yeah, that wicked sense of humor that he's still got to this day. I think if he lost that, then then he'd be really in trouble in the prison. Yeah.
So he was a good brother.
Yeah, we had a good time. I mean, like it was simpler times for us
Yeah.
back then. They were very, very much less complicated. But we still, even when I go and see him in the prison, we still, we laugh and we joke and yeah. So yeah, we still have that connection and are still able to talk. Even though the situation is very bad, then we can still at least look back at the good old days.
Did you saw that he could become the director and of something like WikiLeaks? Did he have this strength or something?
Yeah, he certainly did. I mean, Julian was always fighting injustice and using his knowledge of technology, his understanding of
Yeah.
the internet to do that. And if it was from the early days when it was more hacktivism to under WikiLeaks when it was using encryption technology and the architecture of the internet and this sort of jurisdictional arbitrage to be able to publish using Bitcoin, as a technology to process payments. So having that knowledge, having that skill to combine all these elements together to increase justice in the world, I think he was always trying to do that, and he was always working on different projects to be able to do that. And I think with WikiLeaks, it took off and went global, went huge. But before that, he was still tinkering away, trying to find what would work. How journalists, how can we protect sources using encryption. For instance, he had an encryption program called Rubber Hose encryption. That was an early program that was used, and it had layers of encryption. And so, if you were a journalist, if you were a source, and you were trying to escape with information, but you were caught and you were tortured, you could give up one password and it would open a single layer, and the authorities would believe that layer was the only one, but the other information would be hidden underneath. So Julian developed that as a way to protect sources and to protect journalists, and that was before WikiLeaks. So he's always thinking about how do we do this, how do we use technology to increase people's knowledge and to increase information that would allow us to make good decisions about our government. And if you look, I think if you compare Julian to the Mark Zuckerbergs of the world, the people who, or the Google guys, who were coming up around that same time, look at what they decided to do with this technology, this technology that was available. How did they decide to use it, and how did Julian decide to use it? And I think that's a really great comparison of the integrity of these people, of the strength of character of Julian Assange and the other people who had the same capabilities as him.
Did he talk about social subject? How was it important for him, the justice aspect?
Well, he's had a lot of compassion and compassion for people for people suffering, and I think that was to me, he's always been like that, very compassionate, very understanding. He's able to put himself in other people's shoes very easily, and it was, I think, through that he believed that this sort of bringing us this information would increase the justice in the world. These crimes would be exposed, and this suffering would end. And he was right. He was right. By bringing this information to us, he ended wars. This information ended wars. It ended millions of people suffering, in Iraq. And so, he was able to take that feeling that I think we all have deep down inside, right? Like, we all, feel for children who are suffering, or mothers or fathers who have lost children, or or loved ones, and he was able to take those feelings and um, you know, make them into something that would end the suffering, using these tools. So I think, I'm always amazed. Of like, I love him a lot, and I'm always amazed at what he's been able to achieve, in his life so far.
And yeah, it's interesting that you spoke about the justice aspect because I don't really get, if I get out of my journalistic work now, I don't get how people can be accused of spying to come back to the subject we had in the debut of the interview, because when you saw what he revealed, it's a I want to say it's a natural thing to do to reveal it when you have this information. Because if you don't do it, it can cause you to your ju justice values, I think. It can cause you damage if you don't reveal it. So it's important. It's important that he did that. Last question: how do you think? Because it's late. We have to let you go back now. But just before, how do you think he lives? Uh, how what is his psychology since 5 years now in prison? How do you saw him? How does he keep up? We say.
Yeah, I mean, he's hanging in there. He's hanging in there, but um,
How is he? Where does he find his strength?
well, it comes, it comes from a lot of it comes from within, but I think a lot of it comes from outside, knowing that people are fighting for him outside. And I think, I've spoken to a lot of political prisoners and relatives of political prisoners, and they all say the same thing. What kept them going was knowing that there's people on the outside that are fighting for their freedom. And, one of the main things that we always talk about with Julian is what's going on, like the citizenship in Rome, or, these sort of things. Like we just did this interview, with you, and we're going to the United States next month to, lobby in Congress, and, there's big groups there, and there's groups in London. There's a big protest in London, and telling him all those things and feeding him that information, that really keeps him going inside. Then knowing that there are people all over the world who are fighting for him, who are taking on his fight and making it their own. That's what keeps him going.
I think that we can saw it as a media like a lot of people who want to put him in jail. Um, I think they are afraid that he could become like Nelson Mandela's figure. Who was in prison still in the 80s and became a figure of a movement to change a world, to change a system, to change a country. And I think a lot of people who doesn't want things to change are afraid that it could become this type of figure. What is are your thoughts about that?
Yes, certainly. I mean, I think people put Julian in prison in the first place because they were afraid. They're afraid of being exposed. They're afraid of the tools that he created, that it would disrupt, these power structures that have been developed over the years. That they would be embarrassed, that they like to pretend that they didn't commit any of these crimes, right?
Yeah.
They like to go to dinner parties and eat dessert and laugh and not talk about the children that they've murdered, or the people that they've tortured. Uh, and so I think they are, they're afraid of being exposed. Uh, I don't know if Julian is much of a threat to them anymore. He is the figurehead of this worldwide movement, and I think that is what's going to set him free. Really, is that movement, those people. That's what will set Julian free. But uh, I don't think it's something that we need to be afraid of, or anybody needs to be afraid of. I think it's good, and I think the change that he has brought is a benefit to us as people, as society. We now look at a lot of these media institutions. We look at them with distrust that they deserve. Yeah, and in the past, we didn't. So I think society has benefited a lot, and you can see these old power structures crumbling. They continue to crumble, and eventually Julian will be free, and uh, he doesn't have a state to lead, like Nelson Mandela did, but perhaps he'll be the leader of something else.
Yeah. And we are sure that the brother, you just want, like Ithaka, the movie means the comeback to your city, to his city. In the Greek mythology, I'm sure the brother, you just want to see your brother in good condition again.
Yeah, come home to us and his children and family.
Gabriel Shipton, thank you for being on our media and to have taken the time. People in France, people can go to see the movie on the website. I will put it just below the screen, so
Great.
you can check the link. And is diffused in there is production in many places in France, but mostly independent places. And yeah, what you told in the beginning is really true. Someone that revealed the truth do not deserve to spend the rest of their life in the United States. And if he goes to the US, if he is extradited, it could be a real crisis to what we want as a democracy today.
Mhm.
Thank you again. Et,
Thanks,
euh,
man.
et merci à tous d'avoir regardé cet entretien. Vous pouvez aller sur françois.fr/soutien pour nous soutenir, puisque Julian Assange n'est pas le seul média avec Wikileaks à être attaqué. Aujourd'hui, c'est la liberté de la presse qui est en danger. Et chez nous, c'est pareil, nous avançons uniquement avec les lecteurs. Donc vous pouvez aller sur françois.fr/soutien. À bientôt. Bye again, Gabriel.
Bye.